The SEAL leader's voice cut through the chaos. "Anyone here know how to fly?" No one answered, not a word. Then the scrape of boots against concrete. A woman stood, dust and oil streaking her face, eyes fixed on the silent A-10 in the corner. And in that instant, every man in the hangar stopped breathing. You're watching the Scape, where ordinary moments become legends. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The base was falling apart from the inside. Each strike outside rattled the hangar's ribs, showering dust from the ceiling and flickering the emergency lights. The desert wind pushed smoke through shattered vents, spreading the acrid scent of fuel and burnt metal. Outside, tracer rounds carved arcs of light across the horizon, their glow reflected in the eyes of exhausted soldiers who had long run out of luck. Inside, silence pressed harder than the noise. It wasn't the quiet of calm, it was the stillness that comes right before something breaks. The SEALs knew it was over. Air cover had vanished hours ago. The last jet that tried to launch had been torn apart on takeoff. The only aircraft left inside the hangar was an old A-10, stripped for parts and half buried under tarp and dust. Its shark mouth paint had faded to a dull ghost, and no one had believed it would ever fly again. Commander Hayes stood by the radio rack, static hissing in his ear as he tried command one last time. No response, no evac, no options. He turned to the group of mechanics, medics, and engineers huddled against the wall. His voice broke through the tension, half shout, half prayer. "Anyone here know how to fly?" The words echoed in the smoke. Heads turned toward the ground. A wrench clattered somewhere in the back. No one spoke. They all knew what he was really asking for. Someone to try the impossible. Someone who wouldn't come back. Then movement. Subtle, but unmistakable. A woman stepped away from the shadows near the tool racks. Her boots left faint prints in the dust as she walked toward the center of the hangar. She was smaller than most of the men, her flight suit torn at the knees, hair pulled back beneath a stained cap. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like someone who'd already lost everything once before. Commander Hayes blinked. "You?" he asked. "You can fly that thing?" Her tone was calm, but there was iron underneath. "Not sure it'll fly, but I can make it roar, and that might be enough." In that single sentence, the impossible started breathing again. The men watched in silence as she brushed past them, heading straight for the sleeping beast in the corner. Her hand slid across the A-10's cold fuselage, tracing the chipped edges of the shark mouth. For a second, the air seemed to change, like the desert itself was listening. She climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit, and ran her fingers across the dead instrument panel. The seat hissed softly beneath her weight. She whispered something, too low for anyone to hear. A name, maybe, or a promise. Then, with practiced precision, she flipped a row of switches. Nothing. She tried again, slower this time, like coaxing a memory back to life. The first spark came suddenly, a low hum from deep inside the fuselage, a cough of dust, a faint vibration through the hangar floor. One of the SEALs muttered, "That can't be." The hum turned to a groan. The groan became a whine. Then, with a deafening roar, the left engine caught fire and bellowed smoke through the open doors. Sparks scattered across the concrete. The noise was raw, uneven, alive. Every man in the hangar froze. They had seen miracles before, but never like this, born from rust and defiance. Commander Hayes's eyes widened as the second engine ignited.
the A-10's turbine spooling to a growl that shook the metal beams overhead. Light burst through the cockpit, cutting through the smoke. For a heartbeat, the war outside went quiet. Even the shelling stopped, as if the desert itself wanted to watch what would happen next. The Warthog was awake again, and for the first time that night, the base wasn't silent. But no one there, not even the SEAL leader, knew who she really was. The roar grew until it drowned everything else, the alarms, the shouting, even the pounding artillery outside. Men covered their ears as the A-10's turbine screamed back to life, sending clouds of dust whipping across the hangar floor. The old jet shook on its landing gear like a beast remembering how to breathe. Commander Hayes stepped forward, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "Shut it down! The fuel line's cracked! She'll blow!" But the woman in the cockpit didn't move. Her hands glided across the switches with precision that betrayed years of muscle memory. Every motion was exact, unhurried, like she was tracing a language she once spoken fluently. The panels flickered to life one by one. Oxygen flow, hydraulics, targeting feed, all systems that should have been dead long ago. The men below exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know her name, and yet the way she handled that jet made something in their chest tighten. This wasn't guesswork. This was a pilot who had been here before. Outside, the desert erupted. Enemy armor pushed through the breach, firing blindly toward the base. The night flashed with muzzle fire, painting the dunes in orange bursts. Hayes's radio crackled with desperation. SEAL units pinned near the perimeter, screaming for air cover that didn't exist. He looked at the A-10 again. Smoke poured from one exhaust, hydraulic fluid streaking the floor. It shouldn't even have been capable of taxiing, but the woman's hands never hesitated.
The engines roared once more, deeper this time, throatier, alive. The blast of heat forced everyone back. The jet's lights cut through the haze like the eyes of something ancient that refused to die. Hayes yelled over the noise, "You can't take that thing up! It's suicide!" Through the glass canopy, her gaze met his, calm, focused, not arrogance, conviction. She gave a small nod, just once, as if acknowledging his fear before dismissing it completely. Then she pointed to the ground crew nearest the hangar doors and made a circular motion with her hand. "Open them." They hesitated. She repeated it, firmer. The crew obeyed. The metal doors groaned as they rose, revealing the burning valley beyond. The cold night winds surged in, mixing with the exhaust. Every eye in the hangar was on her. The A-10's turbines spooled to maximum, the floor trembling under the power. For a second, no one could tell whether it was madness or courage taking shape before them. And then the impossible happened. The Warthog moved. The old jet lurched forward, its wheels screeching, engines coughing flame. Sparks trailed behind it as it rolled toward the open night. Hayes tried one last time, shouting through the comms, "Identify yourself, pilot! Who the hell are you?" Her voice came back steady, almost serene. "This matter. Just keep them alive for 5 more minutes." She pushed the throttles forward. The roar deepened, echoing through the valley like thunder rolling across stone. The A-10 leapt from the runway, nose lifting into the smoke-filled sky. Every soldier left on the ground stopped moving, their faces lit by the flames of a jet that shouldn't have existed. For a moment, even the enemy froze.
No one had expected air support. The sudden streak of light slicing across the night felt like a ghost returning to battle. From the ridge, the SEAL unit looked up, disbelief washing over their faces. No way. That's an A-10. That's our bird. And then the radio crackled with a single line that made the blood drain from every face on the channel. Call sign Phoenix, on station. The desert went silent. The A-10 tore through the smoke like something ripped from a memory. The engine screamed in protest, spitting orange light against the black desert sky. Below, the valley shimmered with muzzle flashes, lines of fire tracing through dust and heat. For the first time in hours, the SEAL unit on the ground stopped shouting into dead radios. They just stared upward. Hayes pressed the headset to his ear, trying to believe what he was hearing. Call sign Phoenix, on station. The voice was calm, almost detached, the tone of someone who had already accepted the cost. It wasn't bravado. It was familiarity. The voice of a pilot who had walked into death before and somehow come back. Phoenix, confirm, he said, fighting static. You're reading this frequency?
The reply came sharp and clear. Copy that, Commander. I see your flares. Keep your teams low and mark targets. I've got 60 rounds in the Avenger. Make them count. Hayes turned to his men, disbelief mixing with urgency. You heard her? Paint the ridge. She's going in hot. The team scrambled to set markers. Red smoke erupted over enemy armor, pushing across the dunes. The tanks were closing fast, their cannons aimed straight at the bunker line. Hayes could hear the panic in his men's breathing, could feel the fear vibrating through the floor. But above all of it, he heard the growing whine of the Warthog banking through the darkness. She flew low, impossibly low. The engines coughed smoke as she dropped beneath the ridge line, a silhouette slicing through the haze. The radar pings that once guided her were gone. She flew by instinct, tracing every curve of the terrain like a memory carved into muscle. The gun camera lit the cockpit in pale light. Her hands were steady, eyes locked on the ground below. The desert stretched beneath her like a map drawn in fire. She could almost hear the voices of the crew she once lost here, years before. It was the same valley, the same smell of burning sand, and now she was back to finish what they couldn't. She leveled the wings. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. Come on, old friend. One last run. The GAU-8 Avenger thundered to life. 7 barrels spun, spewing fire into the night. Each burst ripped the air apart, 30mm rounds tearing through metal, turning tanks into molten silhouettes. The recoil rattled her teeth, the cockpit shaking like it might shatter. On the ground, the SEALs dove for cover as tracer lines cut a path of daylight across the sand. When the last shell hit, silence returned. Thick, ringing, impossible. Smoke rolled across the dunes like a wave retreating into darkness. Hayes lifted his head, eyes wide. The enemy line was gone. Just twisted wrecks glowing under the moon. He pressed his radio again. Phoenix, do you copy? That was perfect. You saved us. Static. Then her voice. Softer this time. Not done yet. The radar warning tone screamed in her headset. Missiles inbound. She yanked the throttle, pulling the Warthog into a climb that rattled every bolt on the airframe. The right engine coughed flame, then steadied. She banked hard, the horizon tilting sideways. Through the canopy, she could see streaks of light rising toward her. Hate-seekers, too fast to outrun. Countermeasures active, she muttered, flipping a switch. Flares burst behind her like falling stars, each one a desperate heartbeat of light against the dark. One missile veered off. Another didn't. The explosion caught the wing. Tearing a line of metal from tip to root, the cockpit shuddered, warning lights cascaded across the panels.
Smoke filled her lungs. She coughed, eyes stinging, one hand gripping the controls. The altimeter spun,
The A-10 dropped low again, skimming the ridge at barely 200 feet. She could hear the metal groaning beneath her boots, feel the stick trembling. Down below, Hayes saw the fireball and shouted into the comms, "Phoenix, talk to me, you hit?" No answer, just the wind. Then, through the static, her voice came back, calm, distant, and utterly unbroken. Still flying. The line went dead. The desert sky swallowed the sound of her engine as the A-10 fell into darkness. Warning screamed across the console, hydraulic failure, fuel pressure dropping, left wing compromised, but she ignored them all. The stick trembled under her hands, the airframe groaning like a wounded animal trying to stay upright. For a moment she could see nothing but smoke, flashes of tracer fire reflected in the canopy glass. She wiped the soot from her visor, squinting through the haze. The horizon tilted sideways again. The stars slid across the windshield in dizzying streaks of silver. Beneath her, the desert wasn't a landscape anymore. It was an ocean of black sand lit by pockets of flame. Each light below marked a place where someone had fought or fallen. Her mind wasn't in the cockpit anymore. It was 5 years ago, in another valley, another ambush, the same sound of missile locks, the same panic in her co-pilot's voice before static took him forever. That mission had been buried with her service record, sealed under classified ink. She was never meant to fly again. But as the alarm screamed, something deep inside her shifted, the weight of all those years compressed into a single thought. Not this time. She slammed the throttle forward. The A-10 answered with a guttural roar, shaking off the smoke that clung to its wings. Metal groaned, but the jet climbed, clawing its way back toward the stars. The G-forces pressed her into the seat. Every breath burned. Through the static, she caught fragments of voices, SEAL units on open frequency shouting her call sign like a lifeline. "Phoenix, say again. Phoenix, are you airborne?" Her hand found the radio switch. "Still flying," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The ground radar flared red. Another convoy was pushing through the canyon, the same route that had swallowed her team years earlier. She could almost see the ghosts waiting there, shadows of what was lost. If she didn't stop them now, they would breach the base within minutes. There was no time to circle back, no altitude to spare. She was flying on instinct, adrenaline, and the faint hum of an engine that should have died miles ago. She banked hard toward the canyon. The wings shuddered, shedding sparks that trailed like fireflies. The cockpit lights flickered out. Total electrical loss. Only the moonlight guided her now, carving outlines across jagged ridges. She could feel every vibration through her fingertips, the aircraft alive beneath her, trembling but obedient. Down below, Hayes and his team tracked the faint silhouette cutting across the horizon. The comms were barely functional, but his voice found her anyway. "Phoenix, that canyon's suicide. You've got no flares left. Pull out." Her reply came slow, quiet, resolute. "Not pulling out, Commander. They're heading for you. I've got one pass left. That's all I need." Hayes closed his eyes, pressing a hand to the side of his helmet. "Then God help you." The canyon swallowed her whole. The walls narrowed around her like closing fists of stone. The altimeter spun. Warning tones merged into a single unbroken scream. She adjusted the trim manually, her hands shaking from the effort. Every inch of the A-10 fought her, but she held the line, not because the jet could handle it, but because she refused to let go. Outside the windshield, the convoy emerged, armored vehicles crawling along the canyon floor, their guns already rising toward her shadow. She took a breath, steady and deep. Her fingers hovered over the trigger one last time. "Come on, old friend. We finish this together." The GAU-8 roared to life, spitting a stream of molten fire down the canyon. The recoil slammed her back, the cockpit filling with vibration so violent it blurred her vision. Tracers cut through smoke and stone, turning tanks into bursts of light that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Her ammunition counter spun to zero, and the roar died into silence. But the silence didn't last. The enemy's return fire erupted, flares and streaks of light clawing up the canyon walls toward her. One missile clipped the tail. The explosion rocked the jet sideways, sparks raining from the damaged fuselage. Alarms blared again, structural integrity critical. She pulled hard, the horizon spinning. The jet climbed, straining against gravity, its left wing tearing at the seams. Panels ripped away, tumbling into the darkness below. The engines howled in protest. Every light in the cockpit turned red. "Phoenix, eject!" Hayes's voice broke through the static. "You're hit bad. Do you copy? Eject now!" Her hand hovered over the lever. For a heartbeat, she considered it. The canopy glass was cracked, wind screaming through the cracks. The stars blurred above her like distant promises. Then she shook her head. "Negative, Commander." Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "She's not done yet." She leveled the aircraft, forcing the nose up with everything she had left. The A-10 clawed its way back toward the ridge, leaving a trail of burning fragments behind. Each second felt borrowed, stolen from the laws of physics themselves. The altimeter climbed, 400 feet, 500 feet, 600 feet. The desert began to open beneath her again. Hayes and his men watched from below as the streak of fire rose over the canyon lip. It was broken, burning, and yet somehow beautiful. A machine refusing to die. "Phoenix, she's making it out," one of the SEALs whispered. Hayes didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the sky, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He'd seen many pilots go down, but never one fight gravity like it was an enemy she could actually beat. The A-10 cleared the ridge. Flames licked across its wing, the engines coughing smoke. For a moment, it seemed to hover, a dark shape against a sea of fire. And then, as if the entire desert inhaled at once, the comms crackled with her voice again. "Target neutralized, returning to base." The hangar erupted with disbelief. Cheers mixed with tears. The men who had given up only an hour ago were now running to prep the landing strip, shouting orders through static. Hayes didn't move. He just listened to the sound of a voice echoing through the headset. Steady, alive, impossible. But up in the sky had other plans. The damaged wing faltered, the nose dipping slightly. The A-10 trembled, fighting to stay airborne. Smoke poured from the fuselage, sparks trailing into the night. She tried to stabilize, but the control column locked halfway through the maneuver. The radar blinked, altitude dropping again. "Phoenix," Hayes said, his voice cracking through the static. "You're too low. Pull up, do you hear me? Pull up." There was no reply, only the faint hum of the engines fading into the wind. And then the night went quiet. The desert swallowed the sound of her jet as it vanished beyond the ridge. For a few seconds, no one moved. Even the shelling had stopped, as if the entire battlefield was holding its breath. Hayes stared at the horizon, headset pressed to his ear, waiting for anything. Static, a beacon, a heartbeat. All he got was silence. A slow wind swept across the dunes, carrying with it the smell of jet fuel and burnt sand. The men around them lowered their weapons, their faces ghostly in the firelight. Someone whispered, "She's gone." Hayes didn't answer. His mind refused to register the words. That call sign, Phoenix, it wasn't random. It had been erased from the records years ago. He tore the headset off and turned toward the comms officer. "Scan the ridge. I want a transponder, now." The officer hesitated. "Sir, we're not reading anything. It's like she..." "Keep scanning," Hayes barked. His voice cracked halfway through the word. "She's out there." Minutes blended together. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. Every second felt longer than the last. The radio hissed softly, teasing them with ghosts of sound. Then, a pulse. A faint signal blinked once on the radar, then disappeared. "There," the operator shouted. "South of the canyon. It's weak, but it's her." Hayes grabbed his rifle and started running before anyone else could react. "Get the med team moving, now!" The ridge loomed ahead, its slopes slick with ash and sand. Each step sank deep into the ground, the air thick with heat and dust. When they reached the crest, the world fell silent again. Below, smoke curled in lazy spirals from a patch of glowing wreckage. What remained of the A-10 lay half buried, its wings torn away, the shark mouth paint scorched to black. The seals spread out, searching through debris. The wreck smelled of fuel and metal, like the aftermath of a storm. Hayes moved toward the cockpit, his boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted aluminum. The canopy was gone, blown free in the crash. The seat was empty. "She ejected," one of the men said, scanning the sand with a flashlight. "She had to." Hayes didn't respond. He was staring at something glinting near the nose of the wreck. Half buried under ash was a small metal tag, scorched at the edges. He bent down and wiped it clean. The engraving was faint, but unmistakable. Call sign, Phoenix. Captain Elena Ward. For a long moment, no one spoke. The name hung in the air like a secret resurrected. Hayes had heard it before, years ago, whispered in after-action reports, buried in classified files. A pilot declared dead after a mission gone wrong in this same desert, a mission that command had erased from every record. He straightened slowly, eyes scanning the dunes. "He shouldn't be here," he murmured. "She shouldn't even exist." Then, through the haze, something moved. A figure, small and unsteady, climbing out from behind a dune. The men raised their weapons on instinct, then froze. It was her. She was limping, her flight suit torn and smeared with sand and blood. One arm clutched tight against her ribs. The desert wind whipped her hair across her face, but her eyes, those calm, unflinching eyes, were the same. The team rushed forward. Hayes met her halfway, catching her before she collapsed. "We thought you were—" She cut him off, voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet." Her knees buckled, and he eased her to the ground. The medics swarmed around, checking vitals, cutting open her sleeve to reach the wounds. She waved them off weakly. "Check the ridge," she said. "2 vehicles got through before the strike." "Forget the ridge," Hayes said. "You're done. You hear me? You did enough." But her gaze didn't soften. "If they reach the supply line, it's over. You have to finish it." He looked at her for a long moment, seeing the same quiet defiance that had frozen every man in that hangar hours before. There was no arrogance, no hero's pride, just resolve. The medics lifted her onto a stretcher, her breathing shallow but steady. As they carried her back toward the base, she turned her head slightly, eyes drifting toward the wreckage of the A-10. The rising sun was beginning to touch the desert floor, painting the broken metal in gold. For a second, she smiled. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but real. And then, as the morning light crept higher, the sound of distant engines echoed across the dunes. Vehicles approaching fast. Hayes froze, realization cutting through the exhaustion. "They're coming," one of the SEALs said. "The rest of the convoy." Hayes looked back at her stretcher. "Get her under cover," he ordered, gripping his rifle. "We hold this line." The desert wind rose again, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of gunpowder. In the distance, shapes began to appear, armored silhouettes moving through the heat haze. The SEALs formed up, their boots digging into the sand. Hayes raised his hand, signaling silence. The world went still again. And then over the radio, a voice crackled through the static. Soft, hoarse, but unmistakably hers. "Commander, I've got one flare left." Hayes turned toward the medics in disbelief. She was still holding the transmitter, her fingers tight around it, eyes fixed on the rising sun. The men froze. The desert went quiet. The first light of dawn crept over the dunes, turning the smoke into ribbons of gold. The SEALs crouched behind the ridge, rifles trembling in their hands as engines rumbled in the distance. Another convoy was coming, larger, faster, closing in. They were almost out of ammunition. Hayes pressed his headset. "Phoenix, do you read?" Through the static came her voice, faint but certain. "I've got one flare left." Every man froze. The medic beside her shook his head. "Ma'am, you can't move. You need to rest." But she was already pushing herself up, one hand gripping the side of the ruined A-10. "There's still fuel in the tank," she said softly. "Enough for one last light." Hayes stepped forward. "You don't have to do this." She turned, eyes calm, a trace of a smile ghosting her face. "I didn't have to do any of it, but I did." Her boots dragged through the sand as she reached the shattered fuselage. The morning wind tugged at her torn flight suit, ash clinging to her hair. The jet stood before her like a fallen monument, broken but unyielding. She brushed her hand along its scorched skin. "You've done enough," she whispered. "Let me finish it." From her belt, she pulled a single flare, its casing cracked, paint burned away. She loaded it into the pistol, steadied her aim toward the leaking fuel line, and fired.
The explosion shattered the silence. A column of white fire tore through the dawn, lighting up the valley like a second sun. Heat rushed over the ridge, sand lifting in waves. Hayes threw up his arm to shield his face, shouting, "Move! Push forward!" The SEALs surged ahead under the cover of the blast. The flare's glare blinded the enemy convoy, their shots going wide as the SEALs advanced. Tracers tore through smoke and dust, each muzzle flash burning for a heartbeat before vanishing into the light. Elena fell to her knees as the ground shook beneath her. The roar of the explosion rolled across the desert like thunder, echoing against the cliffs. She pressed her hand into the sand, feeling the vibration fade. When the flames dimmed, the battlefield was still. Hayes climbed the ridge and stopped beside her. The air reeked of fuel and gunpowder, the wreck of the A-10 burning behind them. He looked at her, the woman who had walked out of a hangar and changed the course of a war. He said, "You did it," quietly. Her voice came weak but steady. "We did." She looked up, eyes fixed on the rising column of smoke curling into the sky. The flare still burned bright, drifting higher, a single spark defying gravity. Hayes followed her gaze. Around them, silence settled again, heavy, but peaceful this time. When command finally contacted, all they found was wreckage, scorched sand, and one name whispered by every survivor: Phoenix. No reports, no medals, no official records. Just a flare that burned longer than it should have, and the memory of a pilot who stood when no one else would. And long after the smoke cleared, whenever a warthog's roar rolled across the desert, the men who'd been there that night would pause, look up, and say nothing, because they knew some legends never die. They just rise again.